Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to meet another person here in Milford who isn't just talking about what should be done or how it should be done, but who's willing to put time in and try and make it better. My hat is off to all the candidates, regardless of its school committee, selectmen, any of the boards, because I guess we can take these off since we're 8 feet apart and we aren't getting next to each other. These are the people who stand up, put their own time in, and try and make a difference. And whether not everybody can win, but whether you win or lose, I think they all deserve a thank you for trying. So let's start with an introduction.
I'm Crean. I'm from Milford, and I'm running for state senate.
Now, I got to ask you a question. Most people would start with like school committee, selectmen, local boards. You're going right to the Senate. What drove you all the way there?
Combination of things. One would be the fact that I felt as though we needed a little bit more leadership and advocacy in Boston, and I saw the opportunity that nobody was running on the Democratic ticket and wanted to make the change and make an effort to do something rather than complain about stuff, you know? Kind of put my money where my mouth is.
I'm going to get back to that question, but I always start off, and you're familiar with the show. You've been on a number of times, helping us understand different perspectives. Chris, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Why not? I'm from Milford, not originally, but for over 40 years I've lived here. I came in '78 and have seen Milford evolve over the years, good and bad. My daughter went to school here, product of the Milford school system. My grandkids are born here, although they live in Hopedale now. We won't talk about that. You know, I'm a part of Milford. I'm a town meeting member. I was the chair of the Democratic Town Committee. Milford matters to me. You know, I think it's a wonderful town. It was great to raise my daughter here, and I want to keep it nice, and I want to do whatever I can to make it better, if possible.
No, you've always tried.
That's all you can do.
Now, we left a hanging question. No Democrat was running for state senate. Mm-hmm. Do you find that odd? I mean, Massachusetts, could you get any bluer? Maybe California.
You know, no, actually, I don't really find it odd. When you think about, I mean, in the abstract, it's easy to say, why doesn't somebody run? Well, seat's open, or, you know, there's an opportunity. But when you really start thinking about it, I mean, it's a big commitment, both for yourself as well as your family. It's also putting yourself out there, trying to sell yourself to people that don't know you. And, I mean, that's a big ask. So it takes a lot of thought, I think.
It's also not very lucrative. I mean, when I think of what we pay our state reps and our state senators, mm-hmm. most of the admin assistants and the tech companies around the area, mm-hmm. they're making more money than our reps. Mm. So it's a big ask, and then you say, okay, in my experience, it's not a 40-hour-a-week job.
I don't know. If you average it out at the end of the legislative years, you would put in a lot of hours, because I know that a lot of legislatures will go crazy hours late into the night.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's not 40 hours. I mean, I see
no,
people...
No, it's not consistent 40 hours.
It's 60, 70,
mm-hmm.
you know, because it's easy for me to say I saw our rep on a Friday night here. I saw him on a Wednesday night there. Okay. But wait a minute, I was home. He's out every night, mm-hmm. because how many towns will you have to represent?
14.
So, you know, seeing somebody who's in Milford, mm-hmm. who lives in Milford, makes it easy. But getting around to 14 towns?
I did that for 35 years when I worked for DCF. I was all over those towns.
Really?
I know them, yeah. I was on the road before GPS. I see, it was to read maps to get to some of the places and locations, in the towns. It's a great area. It's beautiful.
What do you think the biggest challenge is for Beacon Hill?
Money,
Too much money and not enough to spend it on?
yeah. It's a combination of resources and where their priorities are. And so, and I'm sure there's priorities or need in so many different areas. At some point, you have to pare down to say, let's triage and what needs to be done first. I think in a perfect world, maybe things could be done a little differently.
Well, I mean, you always get a kick out of, in a perfect world, some of these concepts that people find fault with. World peace. Who would not say world peace is a good idea?
Right, sure.
Free college, free everything. In a perfect world, that would happen. But how do
you get there?
How do you get there?
Yeah. Well, I think it's good to have goals. Sometimes maybe the pie in the sky things seem, all right, ridiculous, so why even bother? But sometimes the opportunity might present itself to achieve those goals. Maybe the time wasn't right before, or someone hadn't thought of a different pathway there. And I'm thinking just off the top of my head, we've been talking about single payer, right? For a lot of years, and it's been back and forth. And maybe in the time of COVID, with people losing their jobs and with that their health care, maybe this is a time to really look hard at options and take a different path.
Does it work?
Does what work?
Socialized medicine, single payer?
In other countries, apparently the system works. So why not here?
I just remember I loved socialized medicine when I lived in France. It's the best thing in the world I ever had, because I had Blue Cross Blue Shield from America. So if my wife got sick, if I got sick, boy, they took us in a heartbeat, because they got paid full scale. Her girlfriends have to wait a month, 2 months.
Depending on what the issue is. You and I both know that, right? We have to wait now for services. Sometimes if it's not emergency, people are back up with knee surgery for months sometimes. It's not emergent. So, I mean, I honestly say that where people have argued that you got to wait long lines to get to some services in other countries, I think that's a misnomer.
Well, the part I don't buy for a moment, and I may have a jaundiced view, because when I talk to Jeff Hopkins, who runs our emergency room at the Milford Medical Center, he tells me up front, I never ask a patient Visa or MasterCard.
Right.
You know, that pesky Hippocratic oath he took, do no harm, take care of everybody. If you show up in the emergency room, he's going to treat you to the best of his ability. It's not going to be, well, let's see, you're on the economy plan, so you get this. So, I sit there and say, I don't know of any of my friends, because if they could do this, they wouldn't be friends, that would turn their back on a sick child.
Right.
When they talk about giving health care to immigrants, I mean, could you turn your back on a sick boy or girl saying,
Well, I couldn't.
I don't know who could.
Apparently there are some that do.
I mean, I can think about it in the abstract.
But I've heard of other anecdotal stories where hospitals have turned people away.
Really?
Well, look at what happens sometimes if, for example, someone comes to the hospital and because of religious beliefs, the hospital's allowed not to treat them. If it's a hospital of a particular faith, we're collectively are the U.S., right? They don't have to take them. And I know I've heard anecdotal stories of that, when people have had to be turned away and go to another hospital.
See, that one bothers me.
It happens.
It just, I can understand that people have a faith and they don't believe, I mean, obviously things like abortion and all. But wait a minute, if you're a public hospital.
No, we're not saying public, so I guess these are private, in fairness. But,
Chris, you're a private hospital and there's nowhere around you. To me, tomato, tomato.
that's unethical, almost.
Yeah, it doesn't feel right to say,
No, it
wait a
doesn't
minute.
feel right for me either.
You know,
So how do we
if I
challenge
ignore
that?
you got the sniffles, and I say, okay, you don't have insurance, I'm not going to see you. I'll wait till you have pneumonia. Now, all of a sudden, when you go into the emergency room, it's not a couple $100 bill.
Right.
It's a few thousand, and hopefully it's only money that gets thrown. So I guess the whole healthcare system, I know I didn't like what I saw in socialized medicine in France.
What was that?
That it was one payer, but if you were under that system, you almost couldn't get treatment without an act of Parliament or in England or an act of Congress.
So how often, when you were in France, did you go for checkups or maybe
See, I
just little
didn't.
sniffles?
That's what I say. I have a jaundiced view because
Okay, so you really haven't had firsthand experience being in a position where you had to be real critical before you got treatment.
no, I was 23, still healthy,
Okay,
you know.
so circumstances are different.
But I guess it does bother me just thinking that people could be turned away. That makes no sense to me.
I agree, but
You know, like I say, I can't imagine some young kid saying, Miss Chris, help me. And if you turned your back on her, I wouldn't consider you a friend.
right.
I wouldn't consider you human.
Well, I mean, what about people that opt not to go to get treatment because they don't have insurance? In a way, we kind of set up a system that, prevents them maybe from feeling comfortable, or people that have to ration their insulin because the price has gone up so high. Isn't that the same as kind of turning people away in a sense? We've set up a system that puts so many barriers to some people getting treatment or good care, that we cause the same thing.
But see, you bring up a really good point, because I watched my insulin go from $100 when I ordered it up to $400. And you sit there and you shake your head saying, wait a minute, you can't tell me you're investing in research.
Right.
Because this has been around, insulin's been around.
Didn't they not take a pattern on it too, the people that developed insulin?
But even if you did, 17
But they
years
did it
later.
so it would be available to everybody free.
Well, but I mean,
theoretically.
it's similar to some of the vaccines. When you think about the mumps, rubella vaccine, no commercial company in their right mind is going to make it, because the state's only going to pay $25 a dose. So the state had to take over. But that way, every child,
Everybody gets it.
everybody
Isn't
has
that
it.
socialized medicine?
In that way, yes.
You could put a label on it, and it maybe takes a different
Well,
connotation.
that's why I say I don't pretend to know enough
Right.
to say it's absolutely good or absolutely bad. There are parts that I lived with that I wasn't overly happy, or I was very happy that I had American insurance.
Right.
But I mean, fundamental basic insurance, I don't know how, or forget insurance, access to medical care.
Well, we have access. We just don't have coverage. I mean, we got a lot of medical care out here. We've got some good hospitals. So when you say access, it means...
But see, there I'll disagree. If I can't afford to go, then I don't have access.
Right, that's the whole point of insurance, so that you can afford to go, so
Right.
you have the backup, like car insurance, right? It protects you in the event you get into an accident, your car gets totaled, you're not starting from scratch, theoretically.
So how does this single payer work? Does it cost more, or?
Well, like you, I mean, I don't have all the knowledge to really be able to fully say, oh, it works this way. My understanding is, and some studies have been shown, that single payer versus what we currently have, what we currently have, we're not going to be able to afford either.
Well, that's...
So,
Eventually you get to a point, because when I'm hiring new people, I mean, we're lucky at the company that we're actually expanding, and when they ask me about benefits, I say, well, our benefits are as good or as bad as every other biotech. You know, I mean, good was when 20-some years ago, the company we founded gave you free health care,
Sure.
and it was Blue Cross's better plan. To me, that was good.
Is that 20 years ago or more?
Well, maybe 30 or so. Yeah, I've been in Milford 30 years, so it's probably more like 40 years ago. Anything below that, to me, is different levels of not as good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you start thinking about what you're paying.
And versus what you're getting or what you have access to. And over the years, you know, insurance has gone up double digits.
Oh,
Well,
God.
not this year, 8%.
Well, I mean, I remember when they started coining the term medical inflation.
Mm.
And it just bothered. I said, you're trying to rationalize 10 and 12% increases?
Of course. You know, you never know. They have needs. But, you know, think about the whole evolution of insurance, health insurance. Whereas used to be in 50s, 60s. My dad was a doctor. And I remember him doing house calls. But I remember, you know, people used to pay directly to the doctor. They used insurance when they had to go to the hospital. And that was the basic. Now, granted, medical science has had so many advancements, and it's gotten more sophisticated and complicated. But it evolved. And I remember when the HMOs first started. Wasn't that like in the 70s?
Probably.
Yeah, late 70s and so. And that was the greatest thing since sliced bread because it was inexpensive. You were able to pay your doctor bills. So the camel got his nose in the tent, right? And now, fast forward all these years later, they're just as, everybody's competitive, everybody's expensive. Everybody has a completely different set of rules.
So now we're facing COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
In your mind, are we winning?
Jeez, I don't know. I think we're at a stalemate right now, it feels. I think definitely
I almost feel like I'm in the eye of the storm.
Okay.
I'm kind of nervous about, you know, we've gone through the turbulence.
Mm-hmm.
Right now it seems to be quiet. I don't know if it's fatigue.
Could be a little COVID
But
fatigue.
here we are going into
Well, we're getting more
the winter.
used to the routine, I think, you know, and there's probably that sense of, okay, this is our new normal. And I believe people are kind of bracing for, hopefully not, but an anticipated second wave. And so, yeah, kind of getting at the ready.
Well, some of the norms, like, okay, I don't even think of going out without a mask anymore.
Right. You feel
know,
naked.
Yeah, I mean, kind of reminds me, I looked at my daughter and said, it reminds me of a seatbelt.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, we never, you tucked them behind you and...
When you were a kid, that you and I are close in age. When we were kids, I remember my mom, who was from New York, learning how to drive a car because she didn't have to in New York. I was about 5. My brother was about 3.5. And we were in the car with her while she was taking driving lessons, standing behind her in the driver's seat, okay? So there were no seat belts back then.
But now, I think it really hit me when I had kids.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, if I forgot, well, one of my ungrateful offspring would immediately remind me.
You.
And now it just becomes normal that
Well,
you feel funny without a seatbelt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I feel I have
And
to
it's
put
the
it
same
on.
thing with a mask. I mean, a couple times I've gotten out of my car, I take 2 steps and I'm like,
Right.
something's not right.
Uh-huh.
But in your mind, what do we have to do to get this under control?
I think we got to be consistent. Hasn't that been the message that you're hearing from the medical experts, not Trump? You know, the need for wearing masks, washing hands, and staying distant, and keeping gatherings limited. And it feels like those things have been the mantra for a long time. Now, granted, Fauci said mask no early on, and I know Trump keeps harping on that. We've moved beyond that since then.
But wait a minute. At the beginning of this, I mean, full disclosure, Tony's a crusader. He's a Holy Cross boy. He was there a couple years before me.
Okay.
So I tend to trust his judgment. But even if I didn't, telling me that at the beginning of this pandemic, I had a view with a set of data that's now changed, I guess I don't find that surprising.
What data did he have that you were aware of?
None. There wasn't enough data to prove, in my mind, how to get this dang thing under control. So I could see him saying, wear a mask. And every virus, every infection that we've dealt with, I mean, you think of SARS, all the others. The first thing when Mike Newstein came here, head of infectious diseases, wash your hands, stay away. Okay, so if you add wear a mask, has it really changed? I mean, it's basic principles of...
That's the mantra. Wear a mask, wash your hands, distance,
And distance.
small gatherings. So consistency, if everybody were to do that, and if you're not getting that message from our fearless leader, now we have the dissension and the division about, damn it, my rights, versus should we all wear a mask for the safety of all of us?
But now, I mean, obviously that pesky First Amendment is there. I can say I have my rights. But didn't we go through that when somebody yelled fire in a movie theater? You know what I mean?
Well, there was that caveat with the First Amendment that, for the maybe social good, or if it's going to harm people. And I think there was a lawsuit back probably over 100 years ago, the Supreme Court, that somebody refused to get the smallpox vaccine. And the concern is that, you're taking my rights away, but this is for the betterment of the community. Your decision is going to impact others. And I think that's the kind of line of demarcation maybe for First Amendments. So you could say whatever you want as long as you're not going to harm other people.
How do you feel about the parent who says, I'm not going to vaccinate my kid, I'm going to send a kid to public school?
They have options. If they homeschool, they don't need to vaccinate their kids. If their religious beliefs forbid that, or a special note from a doctor. So there's options people have. But vaccinations, we know from many studies, and not just some anecdotal ones, that say that vaccinations are the best for most kids, and they prevent them from early childhood diseases that could potentially kill them, that could also infect others. And that's, again, a decision that's made for the good of all of us.
I mean, I have no problem. I should not have the right to tell you to vaccinate your kid. It just seems like you should have that decision. But I have a problem with you saying, I'm not going to vaccinate my child, and I'm going to send him or her to a public school. Because now I'm putting 24, 25 kids.
Now you're impacting me.
Right.
So, yeah.
So when I see things like that, like in Milford, we had to increase the VNA budget, the visiting nurses, because TB started coming back.
Right.
And there were people moving into town that came from an area where TB had not been eradicated.
Right.
So, again, I have no problem saying you got to take the treatment or don't come out in public.
Right. Well, there are certain, isn't there it used to be on the Worcester Courthouse, obedience to the law is freedom? Because the law was there to kind of make everybody play in the sandbox nice, trying to allow some liberties and freedoms and some latitude in your life without harming others.
But now, you say you want consistent leadership. That ain't coming from Washington.
No.
You don't have, if you win this election, you don't have the right to tell the U.S. Congress what to do. What can you do on a local level?
Well, I still have a right to tell Congress as one of their constituents.
Yes.
So I still retain that right. At the local level, I think it's important to try to deal with things that we have control over within our communities, how we spend our resources for the communities. What are the greatest needs that we have to address? How can we rethink the way we dole out money for education or for policing or for whatever in the community to the best of the community's needs? And so sometimes, maybe, I always like to think a fresh set of eyes, going in, to be able to try to maybe ask questions and not, sometimes do the mantra, the march with everybody else. Sometimes push on things a little. I think that there's sometimes always more than a couple of ways of doing things.
Now, you mentioned the march.
Mhm.
My feelings are well known to the 6 people who watch the show about the Black Lives Matter marches.
Mhm.
How would you comment on them?
How I feel about them, what I think of them, all of the
Yes.
above.
All of the above.
Now, my feeling is that First Amendment rights, they're trying to get their needs met. They're trying to bring attention to an issue that's been ongoing for a long time. And I think that the original group is trying to do it peacefully and trying to, like I said, bring attention. And I support that. What I don't support is people disrupting that message and getting involved and turning it violent, because I don't think that's the essence of Black Lives Matter. That is outside influences. From where I don't know, but I think the essence of Black Lives Matter is to do peaceful, making their message out clear and concise, and the violence just gets in the way of that message.
Well, you were part of the Black Lives Matter march here in Milford.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I've said it before, I'll support that 100%. People started at one end of Milford,
Mm-hmm.
held their signs, cried out, marched peacefully through Milford,
Mm-hmm.
packed up and went home. What's not to support? That's the whole pesky First Amendment.
Right.
I get,
And people don't have to agree, whatever, but they have the right, and I think it's important that people have a voice. That's democracy.
I mean, if I want to have my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
then I've got to respect that you can have yours. And I can not like it.
Right.
You can think that my ideas are stupid, okay? But don't try and keep them from me, just like I should. But like you say, when you see the violence, I almost think these people are hurting the Black Lives Matter movement.
And I think that's what they're trying to do. I think it's a deliberate disruption. Why put so much effort into disrupting this group of people if you didn't want to make them dismiss the message or disrupt or make them less credible? Because that's what's happening in some of the media is displayed, like they kind of muddy together the Black Lives Matter with some of these rioters. And these are two separate groups, oftentimes.
See, and I think that's what people don't see,
No.
is they look at this as a homogeneous mixture.
Right.
And if you can say homogeneous mixture, but everybody's mixed together and they all believe the same message. Whereas I see it as very heterogeneous. You do have people who are crying out for help. And then you've got people who are throwing bricks and burning.
Right. And how do you tease that out? And the media just kind of, it feels as though the media doesn't take enough time to really fully report and identify what's going on the ground. It just feels as though it's kind of...
But the media has so many minutes to catch your attention.
Wait a minute. They're on 24 hours, 24/7.
Yeah, but I've got a show, I'm a newscaster, I've got 30 minutes, and I want to catch your attention. I'm not thinking about the fact that there's 23 other hours. It bothers me.
So it's more about quantity and not quality?
I think it's more about profit.
Well, that too, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
Or who can get it out first and fastest,
who can get the most people
but not
stopping.
necessarily accurate.
I'm walking across the kitchen and I stop and I watch, and maybe I'll catch an advertisement along the way, and that rings up money for them. Because otherwise, some of the ways these things are reported.
Well, the other thing too, good thing you brought that up. Now, let's go way back to before cable. We had TV stations that had news programs on them, and it was clearly news. And then if it was opinion, it had to be stated it was clearly opinion, right? So now we have cable. There's no regulation like there is regular television. So our news is muddied in with opinion. How do people, maybe if you don't take time for critical thinking how do you discern between opinion and news? And I
do
think
it
it
with
needs to be clearer.
I do it with the selection knob. I get in my car, I turn on Fox News, don't shudder, and I listen till I get halfway to the work. Then I flip over to channel 116 on Sirius to CNN. And somewhere in between, I think is accurate news.
But now, all right, now you're an educated man. You know, you're able to have critical thinking. You've been around enough where you kind of glean out between things that you want to believe versus things that may be more accurate. I just feel as though that, especially with things happening so fast, it's real important for some oversight. Because look at what it's done to our discourse in this country too, you know? And again, the man in Washington hasn't helped, and it's just fanned those flames. I'm not saying he's solely blamed for it, but certainly has instigated
He hasn't
more.
quenched them very much.
No. So it just feels as though, especially relative to the news programs, that there has to be some more clarification. And then people can make their own decision and their own choices and stick with their own beliefs, but at least some lines, some boundaries on where news is news.
Hot topic, voting by mail.
Okay,
say
do a
drawing a
180 here. Okay,
How do you feel?
I feel pretty good about it.
Why?
Well, I think it gives people more options to practice their democracy, right? Who said we couldn't vote by mail? When did that start? You know? And there've been some states that have actually been doing that for longer, and we've had absentee ballots for a long time. So what's the change? What's the difference?
I have a jaundiced view. Amy Neves has been taking care of me for a long time, our town clerk, because for a long time I had a 2-hour ride back and forth to work.
That's a long
And I'll
ride.
admit, it was annoying. And when she gave me an option, she said, you fill in this little piece of paper, and you put 2 stamps on an absentee ballot, and if you can't make it home in time,
You pop it in the mail.
you pop it in the mail.
Oh,
So for the last few years, I mean, we just popped 3 ballots in the mail Saturday.
right.
I guess I've always thought my vote counted,
And it should.
you know, and I don't understand mailing ballots out to everybody, because like any database, it can become stale.
I'm not sure I follow.
Well, where you say, we're not going to give you the option of absentee ballot request. Just every registered voter in Milford
Okay.
gets a ballot mailed.
All right.
I mean, there's probably, I could find a few people who died, who
But that could
moved.
happen anyway.
Well, yeah,
I mean, I'm just saying, you know, so the instances where maybe the what ifs might happen is so minuscule. Because let's say you have somebody that votes election day and keels over the day after, or does an absentee ballot. You
well,
know,
the courts recently said if I die after I vote, my vote still counts.
there you go.
That seems fair.
But, you know, you're going to have those, like, anomalies that do come up, but does that throw out the whole system? No, I don't think so.
I'm perfectly happy with my absentee ballots.
So, tomato, tomato, absentee mail-in, what's the difference?
I guess I don't know enough, you know, to say, is there a risk? That's why I'm asking.
My understanding is with the mail-in ballots, it's almost a lot more oversight than absentee. Because with the mail-in ballots, you have to fill out the form, sign your name, mail it in, and then they mail you that back. It's like a 2-step process. And they have places where you can deposit it directly in your town.
Well, I was told that I wasted $2 or $3 because I could have driven to town hall.
Right.
And there's a
But
repository.
you're keeping the post office alive, and we thank you. So, you know, it's actually more contained and safer when you think about it.
We talk about a lot of things. You mentioned reallocating money. And you say one of the biggest challenges is not having enough money in the system. How do you get enough money in the system?
Well, we'd have to look at how we're getting it right now, which seems to me between rank and file working people that seem to get the brunt of the need versus corporations and businesses that haven't stepped up as much as they should. terms of tax breaks, loopholes. I mean, we fall all over ourselves. We collectively, you know, when a business comes in, we're so quick to give them tax breaks before they've even given us anything. It's a lot of promises. And I'd be curious as how well we track that. And, you know, maybe we need to rethink this. You know, my understanding is that most times we always talk about, well, the tax incentive, we want the businesses here. From what I've read, that doesn't really mean whether or not a business will necessarily come. I mean, we've talked ourselves into believing that, but it's not that significant as we're told.
The TIFs we've offered in Milford, I've been supportive of. The ones that brought with it a building. You know, because this whole idea of, oh, they'll hire people and people will eat more. I don't really know how I count the people they hire and keep.
Does that include building the building,
but,
which is time limited, right?
Well, no, but if you built, like we had an appliance company that came in, and we gave them a TIF to get them to build here versus the next town over. They built a building. And 3 years later, people came out and said, see, you voted for the TIF, and now they've left Milford.
And you got an empty building.
And I said, I don't care. And they said, why? They haven't lived up. I said, number one, the building is still here. So when they built a building, they guaranteeing me tax revenue for the next 30 to 40 years.
Even if they're not there.
Even if they're not there, somebody owns the building.
But that's part of the TIF, though. I mean, it also depends on what you put in the TIF.
Right.
So, I mean, that's great if you think that down the road, right? Because a lot of times the companies, oh yeah, like you said, jobs and this, and we're going to do that. Okay, maybe, all right, we'll give you a partial. You got to come up with the rest, and we'll. Yeah. It just feels as though we're so quick, and it doesn't always pan out.
See, and I almost what I call auction frenzy. You know when people go to auctions, and the contraption's worth $10, and it's $5. Oh, you bid $6, I'll go $7.
It comes because about ego.
But then it becomes an ego thing that I'm going to get you in my town, and that $10 value I'm going to pay $30 for.
And it's good in terms of maybe a little political capital, isn't it?
Yeah, but
for the moment.
Short term.
Well, and think about it. We have 2-year terms. Are we into long, far-sighted kind of goals that maybe not pay out immediately but take a little time? Or are we into short-term kind of flash in the pan?
And Chris, this is the part I don't understand. 2-year terms. I've heard over and over from candidates that if they win the election, they get a weekend to celebrate, and then Monday morning, they're on the phone raising money for the next election 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No, there's too much money in politics. Because we end up having, do we end up getting a candidate because they were able to spend a lot of money or because they were qualified and they had a good message? I mean, maybe we need to kind of level the playing field with money. And we tried to do that years ago.
I was going to say, didn't we try that?
That was, remember what is it, the fine goal?
I can't remember the name, but we were going to level and say,
right.
You can only spend so much.
Moving in that direction, and then Citizens United hit us. So now it's kind of gotten crazy. So how do you get...
And again, both parties bothered me because companies are not people.
Thank you.
You know, so, wait a minute, don't tell me that we're going to limit people, but we're going to have companies donating money. But unions, to me, are companies.
Well, and they're just trying to keep up, and they certainly don't have the deep pockets that companies have.
And it was an escalation game.
Well, that's it. Right. You raise the level there. Everybody's going to have to try to
companies went up $10, so the union has to reach out to more members and pull $10 more. It just bothered me all in.
That's right. Citizens United was awful.
Well, I don't know that Citizens United was awful, but what they did was awful.
That's what Citizens United did. They kind of just carte blanche with the money. And so now, you know, it's out of control.
Well, I remember,
think of all the money we spend on elections that we could spend elsewhere.
I remember asking a candidate many years ago who was running for state office, were you responsible for putting fecal matter in my mailbox?
Ooh.
And he looked, he said, what? I said, I got a notice that was pure fecal matter. It was nothing about what you stand for. It was all about your opponent being bad, 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 bad. And it was, well, I had nothing to do with that.
Discretionary spending.
Yes. Some pack from South Dakota.
Legally, you're allowed, as long as, theoretically, your campaign doesn't collaborate with who's doing the discretionary spending. People could spend as much as they want, no limit. So that's where we get all that dark money, those nasty negative,
Yes.
advertisements that twist the truth and, kind of demonize the opponent.
Well, I mean, even today on question 1,
Oh, yeah, right.
there are times when I want to vote one way because of the advertising. I feel like it's so insulting to my intelligence. A foreign country is going to hack my car and turn it off.
Get your data, and stalkers and wife beaters and
I sit there and say, wait a
yeah.
minute, talk to me about what's real. I cannot imagine that Putin and his cronies are sitting there saying, we want to hack that car in Milford. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, if you look at the advertisements, real quick at the bottom of those negative advertisements for question 1, it's a list of all the car companies that have paid for that. So you kind of, follow the money. So I saw that advertisement and said, well, yeah, this is certainly not too genuine.
It didn't feel real.
Well, didn't we do this in 2012? Technology has changed to this point, so we need to update it. And I want to have more choice. It seems to me they're trying to have a monopoly, right? Less choices, less competition. Isn't that the essence of
I was
capitalism
going to
now?
say, in general, that bothers me. Our country is based on competitive nature.
Theoretically, but we're finding more and more companies tend to merge, and that gets me nervous too, when there's less options.
I mean, I can go to my dealer, and there's a very beautiful waiting area, and there's free coffee and free donuts.
That's at your dealer, right?
That's at my dealer.
Well,
and
sure,
I
think all the money they're putting into that
I pay $400 to
sitting area.
$500 every time I go in there.
That's right.
So instead, I choose local guy Ray Guerrera or a similar local garage owner.
Right,
I'd rather give my money to a Milford business.
right. Or people who are putting money into training and into their equipment rather than a waiting room where you get free coffee.
Yeah, the coffee's nice. The $400 bill, I don't think I've ever gotten
That's
out of there without paying
$400
$400
cup of coffee.
I could buy a lot of cups of coffee
That's
for
right.
that.
You could buy a coffee company.
But, more important to me, I don't know who Herb Chambers is. I have nothing against him. But if I have a choice of giving my $10 to a local business
Right.
or to somebody that owns 32 car lots or whatever, I'm always going to go to the Milford guy.
Yeah, agreed. Me too.
So, maybe you can help me with something. What is question 2?
Question 2 is the ranked choice voting.
Yeah, can you explain that? Because I've had 3 different people explain it to me, totally different.
Okay. I don't know what you've heard or what it's an automatic runoff, basically.
3 people run for a position.
Right,
Nobody gets 51%
right, or 50%.
or 50. What happens?
So I go to the voting booth. I have a choice between you and your wife and your daughter, okay? I say, well, I like your daughter. I think she's my favorite because of X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to put her. But if she doesn't get, or if she comes out the lowest in terms of votes, then my second choice will be you. And then my third choice, if I choose to go there, would be your wife. So the votes come out, and if she's low, okay, well, I didn't waste my vote. My other choice then goes to you. And other people may think differently. So it's an automatic runoff.
1, 2, 3. Third, none of us got the majority.
Right,
So number 3 gets thrown out.
right.
And
Then
their
whoever
votes get distributed.
distributed accordingly to whatever a person's second choice is.
And the idea is that way somebody could get the majority of people.
Right,
Okay, so I did understand it
yeah.
right.
Just think of the CD4, the Congressional District 4th that race with 400 million people that were running. And the winner, Jake Ausenclose, what does he get, 22% or?
1,200 votes or some
So,
ridiculously
and the next
low
one was
number.
Jesse Mermel, who it was like a fraction.
Right.
So the point being is that it was so close, only 22% of the people voted for him. That's, it feels as though a shallow victory, in a sense, for
So
all
it
of them.
wouldn't be that number 3, all his votes or her votes go to the top person. It would be the number 2, you reshuffle the deck,
Pretty much.
eliminate all the votes for number 3.
And all those votes, whomever voted for number 3, whatever their second choice was,
Gets
which
thrown
could
up.
be a variety of,
So it could be all for number 1 or none for number 1.
that's correct.
So that way, the majority of the people might get behind a candidate.
That's right.
That's interesting.
Maybe a little more enthusiasm, and they also feel as though that it would be probably less nastier elections, because if we're running against each other and people may not want me as a first choice, if I'm too nasty to you, are they really going to want to pick me as a second choice? Let's say if it's a flooded field,
Right.
It would kind of make for a little bit more altruism, if you will, with,
Well, we've seen that in Milford over and over, where candidates are running neck and neck, and one of them goes negative. And
it doesn't fly really
Milford
well.
people,
Well, nobody,
I can't talk about the rest of the country, but I've seen it a number of times here, where one candidate's decided, to make fun of the other candidate's dog or something stupid. And all of a sudden, you can feel the tide changing, saying, maybe I don't like Sally that much anyway, because she picked on Chris. In Milford, I mean, we started these shows, the political side, to let people know who you are.
You get to know the candidate as a
So-
person and not throwing mud at somebody else
Well,
all
that
the
was
time.
it. I mean, I've only had one candidate come on the show where I had to say, we're going to stop.
Ooh.
Because I really don't like, he sucks, but I suck less, so vote for me.
The evil of two lessers?
Yes. I mean, I almost felt like that in the last election, but,
Well, and that's again where going back to our commander-in-chief, which, it's one thing to disagree on a person's position or their policy. It's another thing to make fun of them personally, and that's where it gets uncomfortable and ugly and uncalled for.
well, that's where I've said, some of the things I see, I really appreciate. But when our president sometimes opens his mouth, it's hard to appreciate.
It's kind of cringing.
Overall, I don't like people picking on other people.
Especially the vulnerabilities, too. Remember when
Yeah,
you
well, I
felt
mean,
like
come
that in junior high?
I look and I sit there and say, I can claim to be young, thin, and have hair. I look in the mirror, I'm presented with a fat old bald man. And there's nothing I'm going to do at this time. So having somebody make fun of me because I'm not as intelligent as I should be, I'm not as athletic as I should be, absolutely. But don't make fun of me because I'm rotund and I'm old, because I can't do anything. Well, I can do something.
I was kind of hoping that we get to a point in our developmental stage where we don't need to make fun of people like we're in grammar school or junior high anymore. Hopefully at some age we've matured and we can disagree at a different level.
But again, we're back to he sucks or she sucks, I suck less, so
Right.
vote for me. Not what I want to do.
I don't think that's what people want to hear either.
I want to know what you stand for. I can listen to your opponent and he can tell me what he stands for.
And then you make your choice.
And then I choose.
Right.
Which one of you do I trust? Which one of you do I like the most?
Which one do you feel as though would best represent what's important to you?
Now, you pick a year where, I mean, in the past, you win by either having a machine, certain candidates been around 20 years, they've got their machine,
System.
the system, or you win by just god dang work, knocking on doors, 3,000 doors at a time. How do you do that in the age of COVID?
With great difficulty.
But do you give up?
No. Why give up? I mean, if this is important it's important to me, if it's important to someone who's running, you've put yourself out there. You want to give it 100%. And, you know, unless you keep pushing on it and working it right until the end, at the end of the day, at least I know I have to feel like I gave it as much as I could. And whatever the outcome is, I have to feel good about what I tried, you know.
So you knock on a door,
Mm-hmm.
and do people shudder and?
No, I've got my mask, knock on the door, I put, you know, a piece of literature in the door and I step back. And people that have answered the door have been very, for the most part, positive. Not necessarily committing one way or another, but at least saying they'll take a look. Conversations usually brief. I've had a few lengthy conversations with some people, but, you know, usually brief.
But isn't that all you can ask for as a first-timer?
Oh, absolutely. You just consider.
Consider me.
That's it. Take a look, see where I'm at, see what's important to me. If it speaks to you, consider voting for me in November.
What do you see as your role in driving the mass economy?
In terms of our budget, in terms of, when you say mass economy, what are you referring to?
I'm thinking of all the small businesses,
Oh,
all of the union workers. These are not people that are making a fortune,
right.
but these are people, you know, my dad, UAW took care of him for many decades. And he got to work, and he got to put food on our table. Today, I don't know what would happen. So what can you do as a congressperson, a congresswoman?
Well, I wouldn't be a congressperson, I'd be a state senator.
Well, senator, to me it's, okay, it's Beacon Hill.
You gave me a promotion. You know, I think the important thing is small businesses and workers are the backbone of our society. Without them, nothing moves when you think about it. And so I think we need to really look at how we can help and support the small businesses that have been struggling. People have had to close down completely. I'm concerned about tenants, people who have not been able to work and can't pay their rent. And what about the landlords? That ripple effect, you know? Landlords have to pay, not talking about Jeff Kushner type of landlords.
No, but that's the first time, I got a comment, and I apologize for interrupting. It's the first time I've heard out of the same sentence a balance. I've heard people say, all for the tenants, all for the landlords. But it's the first time I've heard somebody say,
Got to have both.
you got to have both.
I mean, it's a system, right? And if, especially landlords who have invested or even lived there, you know, and I've spoken to a number of them on the road. You know, some are saying, I'm fortunate, my tenants have been able to pay, or some of them haven't, but I mean, that's their reality too. So how can we work and look at them both to say, how can we address both their needs? Can we work with the banks? Can we work, you know, other incentives? If we're going to give a tax break, wouldn't that be the way to give the tax breaks for a bank or an institution like that, to give them an incentive to help out mortgagers, you know, so that people can get through this fairly unscathed, because we already have a homeless population in Massachusetts. We don't need to add to it.
Well, see, that's what scares me, is if I make it so that the mom and pops, not the corporation who owns 1 billion apartments,
Right.
they have enough cash flow, they'll weather the storm. Their stockholders may get burnt,
Oh,
but
wow.
they won't go out of business.
The stockholders will recoup if they recoup.
But I worry about mom and pop
Yeah.
who bought that duplex and who need the rent money to
For
pay
their
the
own
mortgage.
house, too.
Right. If you don't somehow help them, eventually they'll sell that dang house. And that's not, I mean, affordable housing, it's a real problem for
Yeah.
people like me trying to recruit people. I mean, I can recruit people from the square states in the middle of the country, but it's getting harder and harder to keep people from going there.
Right, because of the cost of living
'Cause,
and the housing.
you know, my brother-in-law has a 4,000 square foot house down in San Antonio that he paid $300,000 for on
Wow.
a number of acres. His company wanted him to come up here. And he asked, well, what can I get for $300,000? maybe a split. You know, so he didn't come because the cost of living here would be so out of joint with what he's doing.
Right.
So putting landlords out of business to me just makes it harder and harder. But I don't know, again,
But I think, you know, we don't know how to fix a problem sometimes unless we see what the whole problem looks like too, you know? And I think too many times we look at a problem through like a real narrow lens, and we got to look at the ripple effects on everything. And our economy is a system, and you can't isolate something without impacting the other parts of it. So I'd like to do a whole macro approach to things so that you don't miss anything, because otherwise it's going to be a weak fix or a Band-Aid solution.
we could go on forever. But we're at that point where I have to say, Chris, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
You mean after all this, you still have to ask me? Because Milford matters, and the people of Milford matter. This is my home. And not to exclude any other parts of the district, because again, it's all part of the whole. But, you know, Milford's important, and it's got a lot to offer, and we're going to keep it going.
Well, thank you. Thank you for stepping up and saying, I'm not going to be one of the people who talk but refuse to do anything. As I started off the show saying, my hat's off to everybody who is willing to stand up and say, put me in. I'll do my best to fix things. So
Can only try.
good luck.
Thank you.
And to our 6 loyal viewers, I've always said I will never ask you to vote for a specific candidate, not my place. The role of this show has always been to let you meet the candidate, not in an advertisement, and the papers will hate me for saying that, not in a commercial, but just one-on-one. Getting to know, is this person somebody that represents what I believe in? Is this person somebody I like and I trust? Because that's who we want on Beacon Hill. That's who we want in Washington, but somehow I think we've missed that message too often. So as always, I'll beg you to vote. Get educated on the candidates. Pick one that you like, but please get out and vote. And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Thank you. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just